We haven't had power for about 3 days. I think this is day 4 now. So today I woke up to darkness. I flick a switch, the solar is out, and I've got this great plan for preparing tuck for my kids. If I tell you, I took a wet tracksuit bottom and put it in the air fryer when there was still a little bit of solar power to try and dry it up because I didn't have a dryer and it was required. And then it touched the top of the grill and got burnt. So that's... And just as well, we had another one tucked away somewhere, from that a sibling used to wear. Yes. That was the condition. And so I just thank God for that, because if it hadn't been for that, it would have been a disaster, because this young boy needed his tracksuit for school. So you see how before I can even talk about the inconvenience to my business,
Welcome back, everyone, to HUMHR Career Insights. My guest today is a pretty special guest. If you have been listening to my podcast since season 1, you will know about the graduate trainees that I told you about, a special group of people that I started my career with. And this is my second guest who is from that cohort of graduate trainees. And I am very excited about this. So my guest today is Unaiswi Nyikadzino. So she's not just an entrepreneur. Una is a strategist. She's a brand architect, and she's also a value chain thinker. Those may sound like big titles, but once we get into the conversation, you'll see what I mean. She's a seasoned executive leader. She has more than 2 decades of experience across FMCG, hospitality, and agribusiness. She has served at executive level within Schweppes Holdings Africa, driven exports across the region and into the EU, published sustainability reports, launched nationally recognized brands in Zimbabwe, and became the first female executive director in her organization. Today, Una is the founder and lead consultant of StandOwt, a brand growth agency helping businesses articulate their value and grow with clarity. She's also leading Fillers Food, which is a manufacturing company focused on reducing post-harvest losses and empowering Zimbabwean farmers. Una has negotiated with global giants like Coca-Cola Company. She's traveled to 15 countries while being locally based in Zimbabwe. She's pioneered citrus oil exports to the EU and now trains entrepreneurs to build brands from the inside out. Quite a timely guest for our season theme, entrepreneurship as a career choice. This conversation today, we're going to talk about strategy, exports, governance, succession planning, and all things in between, what it truly means to build African businesses that last. Una, welcome to HUMHR Career Insights.
Thank you very much, Batje. I'm privileged and honored to be your second guest from our BAT cohort.
Yes, welcome indeed. Maybe I'll go through all of them. Hey, maybe they will all agree at some point to come on board. I'm struggling to convince some of them.
Sure, that was the 18. So
definitely. I mean, incredible group of people. Look at how all of you have gone to make impact in the world and in your particular areas of expertise, right? So, Una, I always read the script, right? What is available to the public and the bios that you share. But is there something else that you would like to add to your introduction that you would like us to know?
Yeah, just the other side of me, the normal side of me, which is the fact that I'm Kalanga by birth, like someone I know, and, Ndebele by upbringing, Shona by marriage, Christian by choice. I'm a wife, a mom, all those hats that we wear as African women. I wear those hats as well. So there's the softer side of me as well.
Lovely. I love that softer side. And yes, I privileged to fall in that group of Kalanga women, hey? Kalanga women with impact.
Yes. That's us.
Yes, and we had a great laugh, isn't it, about how I'm probably going to be one of the few people that can pronounce your name properly. Unaiswi,
Yes.
such a beautiful name.
Thank you so much, Batje.
Okay, let's dive into today's conversation. Let's go to your corporate life. I know you did corporate, you in consulting, and also in manufacturing. So let's talk about the beginning, your corporate life. You had a remarkable executive career before becoming a consultant, before founding StandOwt. What was your original career vision when you graduated with your marketing degree, and when you went into the graduate traineeship program? What was that career vision?
It certainly wasn't to get into tobacco. That was never the plan. However, the opportunity came up and we were picked out of thousands of people, and it was a great opportunity. I was probably more keen on advertising. That's what I thought my career progression would be like from university. But I'm so glad that God had other plans, and I got to meet you and the rest of the group and work for BAT, because I think we had a very strong foundation. We were privileged, fresh out of university, from theory to get into practicals, and not only just practicals for me as well. Right now, still being in agribusiness, it was such a great foundation. We got to go out into the field. We were learning from field to factory to the market, and we were applying international principles in terms of how to run a business. And what I appreciated the most is that we were taught how to be business people. We weren't just taught how to be experts in our field. Yes, we all had particular sections that we eventually ended up in. I ended up in brand marketing, but we were taught to be business people first and foremost. And that foundation was so critical and has helped to get me to where I am today.
Yeah, foundation. The foundation is always so critical. Then once it's solid, you can learn. And, there's things, of course, that you may have to unlearn, but that great foundation means there's less unlearning to do.
Yeah. And from a global giant as well, so that was really a privilege. Yeah.
Yes, it certainly was. You became the first female executive director at Schweppes. What did that moment mean to you?
So when I say that, not from a statutory perspective, as in, on the company books, the articles of association, but a director from an ExCo perspective, the first female to lead at that high level within the organization. I just thought I needed to hear that. It was an honor, but at the same time, it was humbling, because it meant that a certain trust had been placed on me in an organization that had been typically male, and then a female and a Black female is given the opportunity to lead at that level. It meant that there was a certain level of trust and confidence in my abilities. So it felt great, but it was humbling at the same time.
You've also done export. Was that with the Schweppes as well?
Yeah, that was with Schweppes. So, with Schweppes, I was with Schweppes shortly after, BAT.
Yeah.
And then I left and I went into the hospitality industry. That's a story for another day. I went into the hospitality sector, totally different, industry. And then I went back to Schweppes. They asked me to come back. And that was an honor as well, for people to recognize that I still had something to offer. So I went back. And so during my tenure, I handled public affairs, brand marketing, and then at some point I also had exports thrown into that, where we were exporting some of the biggest cordial brand from Zimbabwe into other countries in the region. It was a challenge. It was very different from what I was used to, but we worked as a team and we grew the business portfolio significantly. And it was a good way of starting to understand different principles of trading globally. So I enjoyed that. Yeah.
What do you think African businesses often underestimate about export readiness?
It's standards and compliance. When you're exporting typically from Africa, it's either you're going into the region or you're going abroad, which is like, EU. Typically, it's the EU, but there's also other Asian countries in the Americas. I think compliance is the biggest issue. The standards are very different. In our African markets, we still have very relaxed standards in comparison. So a brand can be fully compliant in the domestic market and still not meet an international standard. So the benefit of working with international organizations is they always pick the higher standard of the two. So when you have a local standard or local regulations, they will pick, whether it's BAT or Coca-Cola, they pick the highest standard. And that's always made them more or less export ready, right? Whereas with smaller businesses, they'll do what's easier. So if the local standard is lower, they'll probably focus on that and not on the highest standard. So I think compliance and standards is the biggest challenge for businesses, African businesses, when it comes to exporting, because they then have to start investing in a higher standard. And at times it's costly, but if it's the benefit cannot weigh the cost depending on which sector the business is operating in.
Yeah. And I was reading an article about how, in terms of the meeting those standards, right? There's also the second tier of, yes, you meet the standards, but then you have to prove that you meet those standards. And to prove that you meet those standards, you have to get testings done. For instance, if it's food that you are wanting to export, tests have to be done. And that costs a lot of money. I think it was an organic food product that was trying to export, and to get that organic certification was like thousands and thousands of dollars to do that. And do you find that capital, because then that means you need capital for that, do you find that available? Is that accessible to local would-be or local exporters or local prospective exporters?
Yeah, so capital is accessible, and it's typical of any market where it's based on a bankable business plan. So small businesses typically might not yet have a bankable business plan. It's usually the experienced businesses that can demonstrate, sustainability and be able to present their documentation to a bank, and the bank doesn't think twice about making the money available. So you find that in Africa, especially, with regards to export, which has typically been, horticulture products or agricultural products, so to speak, we've had to have donors coming in to help smaller players to comply, which has been beneficial. But I think as governments, we should be investing in our own people when it comes to compliance and standards for exports, because we benefit, the whole economy benefits from export.
Yes.
So we need to invest in that as governments. We do have standards organizations in the different countries, whether it's Standards Association of Zimbabwe, the South Africans Bureau of Standards, SABS. They're there, but a lot of the time, they just support the audit process. They will help you to be audited, whether it's for ISO or whatever standard you're trying to. There's various other bodies as well. It's Global Gap for agricultural products. So they'll help you with the audit process, but the funding for that compliance is something that I believe our governments need to look into in terms of assisting the smaller players.
It seems to me there's got to be some sort of mindset shift, right? To move from like being a local player to export ready. And I want to talk about this a little bit more, because I have seen and I've met a lot of people or have seen experience, about a lot of like our local players are now moving to that export market or wanting to move to that export market. I'm seeing that a lot. Avocados, blueberries. There's a lot of our agricultural stuff that is moving from local to export. And I wanted to talk about that mindset shift. In your experience, is there a mindset shift required, and what is it?
Yeah, there's definitely a mindset shift required. And I would look at it from a twofold perspective. The first is starting with building your local dominance, your local standard. You should be able to deliver a product that meets a high quality standard to your domestic customers, first and foremost. People shouldn't be looking to improve their quality or their standards because there's a global standard that a particular customer is looking for. It should be the norm. And I feel that our governments who are really the watchdogs for these standards are the ones that need to enforce these rules, because I think the willingness is there in terms of the standards being developed and available. But obviously adherence and commitment to the standards is a bit low. So I think it starts at home. We have to start at home, love our consumers enough to say, you know what, I'm going to work towards the highest standard. Because then it becomes easy when you are now ready to export. There isn't much work. You're not having to start afresh, so to speak. You know, with regards to ingredients, there are some ingredients that globally may be considered unacceptable or old-fashioned because of research, but you'll find that, you know, some of our standards in Africa are still behind. And so that same ingredient may be acceptable. Then when you want to export, you can't, because they're like, oops, that ingredient is not allowed in our country. So I think it's important for us to keep up with what's going on globally and give that benefit as well to our domestic customers. And then the additional factor to consider as well is just investment. A lot of the time, the opportunities that come through for export require significant investment. And so sometimes one player cannot consolidate for 20, 40 foot containers of fresh fruit to ship to a particular country. But if we come together and we work together as a team, we consolidate our loads. There may be 40 of us who can do half a container. You know, so it becomes more useful. We're not good at collaborating. There is a collaboration to some extent, but I believe that that's where our mindset needs to shift. We can work as a team and actually make it work. We can all benefit. And I think that's something that as Africans, we're still a little skeptical of working with others. You know, we're not competing, we're cooperating, you know. So I believe that one is a big one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I 100%. There is really right now is the time to move from competition to collaboration. Because we are stronger together. I mean, if you think about how, as a culture, right? In our culture, we are really taught at a young age that we are stronger together. We are taught our families are unified. You know, my sister's children, for instance, are my children. They call me mom. So there's that unity. And I think from a young age, our culture has taught us that where we lost it is probably in the corporate world, where there was that individualism that we are now taught that, you know, to get to the top, you're running a race and you have to kick the next person next to you for you to get to the top. But definitely that move from competition to collaboration that mindset shift will definitely make the difference in becoming export ready, in becoming a global force, right? In impacting globally. Una, this leads us to food fillers, because we are talking about export and food. Can you tell me, this is after years in the corporate world, why entrepreneurship now? I know there's two aspects to your entrepreneurship, right? There's food fillers and there's StandOwt. Can you tell us why entrepreneurship now?
So, you know, Batje, you may not recall this, but when I left BAT, I didn't move into another organization. So after we finished our management training program, I think I left about a year later and I started an event management company with my best friend. So we actually ran an event management company called EventPro. And that was long before event management was a thing in Zim. But we just had a passion for it. So I resigned from my full-time job. She maintained her full-time job. So I was the one full-time working. And we did some big projects. You know, we had Premier Banking. I remember one of our big jobs was the launch of Mazoe in your packaging for Schweppes. You know, we're using our networks. And we also did top companies awards. I remember the theme so clearly in my mind. It was like going for gold. So that was the first time I dabbled in entrepreneurship, believe it or not. fresh out of university, 3 years out of varsity, and there I was doing my own thing. It was fulfilling. It was fun. And I think it's a risk that I took because I'm a fairly risk-averse person, I think. So it's like, it's just me. I'm not married. I've got no kids. It's just me. So if things don't work out, yeah, I'll be fine. You know? So it was a calculated risk. So I didn't just do it blindly, but it's good. And I was doing something that I enjoyed. That's what was most important. I was being creative. Each project was different. Each client was different. So it was a little different from working in one organization. You know, I'm doing more or less the same stuff in the same department, you know. So it was, I left for that reason. But looking at where I am now, I would say that when I left Schweppes, just over 2 years now, because I left in December 2023, they were downsizing our division. So I'd moved to the agri division and they were downsizing our division. There was nothing new in the beverage development that I could be doing. Nothing exciting. I'd done everything that I considered exciting. I'd launched brands. I'd won awards. There was nothing really new. So the opportunity to leave with a package seemed attractive. So for a week, because at some point I was going to have to do it. And the reason why I say have is because if you understand Zimbabwe and the economy that we have and currency changes, etc., 8-to-5 job, unlike in other countries, which guarantees a cushy retirement, it can be cushy whilst you're in it. But from a retirement perspective, to be honest, there really isn't much unless you already have businesses that you've set up or investments. So yes, I did have investments, but I didn't have a proper profit-making business. So I said, you know what, let me take this money and put it into something that I enjoy, that will add value, that will help me to continue to look after my family, but at the same time, build a legacy. Scary, very scary and challenging. Definitely out of my zone, having been used to, you know, Mkoma Frank, make me tea in the work, you know, when my car needed to be serviced, it was all sorted. And, you know, having been used to that, it was not an easy decision, but I think it was worth it. It was tough. It was tough.
Okay. Quite a few themes there as you talk about your transition and why, and the why behind it, right? You talked about network. I actually did not know that you had an enterprise. You had started events management company very early on. So entrepreneurship has obviously been something that you have wanted to do for a long time, and that you find fulfillment in. So, you know, the themes there, that networking, you mentioned how you used your networks to get the contracts, get the business with the events management company. And I do remember tops, top companies. Networking. And then you also mentioned how entrepreneurship in this later stage of your career was not intentional. It was not really a choice. It was more out of necessity that you were going to have to do it anyways for retirement, which brings a lot of different threads to the conversation. Why manufacturing though?
So, you know, I've always loved manufacturing. I mean, if you think about it, from the time when manufacturing, the only time I wasn't in manufacturing was my almost 5-year stint, you know, in the hotel industry. Nice, glamorous, the life. But I've always enjoyed manufacturing. So I had that opportunity, and I developed a love for agribusiness, by the way, because during my work with the Coca-Cola company, they focused on something that they called grove to glass, which is basically understanding the juice value chain from the citrus groves where the orange juice is grown to the glass in your hand. So I was immersed in that. You know, I attended Juice University, you know, in the United States. We were immersed in this value chain. So I knew it, understood it from beginning to end. So when the business backward integrated into processing the juice that we were using for production, the citrus, the orange juice at least, and we took over a plant, a manufacturing facility that was supplying us with the juice, I got to do a lot of work obviously in corporate affairs with that facility, I got to spend a lot of time with the farmers. And during my stakeholder engagements, you were working with the Ministry of Agriculture, working with NGOs that are in the agriculture space. I was working with, a community citrus project. I got to really get immersed in it. So I enjoyed it so much. And that's when I realized the potential of agri-business and value addition, most importantly, because I could see the impact, on the farmers, on the community, and I could see the future of value addition being very beneficial for us as an economy as well. So people will always eat. And so when you're in the food business, you know that there will always be business. So that's really what made me decide. And then it just so happened that I also had the opportunity, because the whole business was being downside, there was this equipment and this brand that I developed that was available for sale. So took the money, bought the equipment, bought the brand, set it up, and that's the journey that I'm on right now. Yeah. Because I was in pain anyway. My baby, this brand that I developed and was doing well in the market when, the company strategy changed. It was no longer being manufactured, no longer being made available. So the opportunity to take it and nurse it back to life is something that I wasn't going to let up on.
So the brand, what's the brand name?
So the brand is called FarmStyle, because the idea was, we're doing products that are from the farm. Even if they are processed, it's produce that's coming from the farm. So even though we're canning and packing in sachets and it was processed, I thought that, as we develop the brand, as we grow it, it would still resonate regardless of what other products we would be packing.
Now you mentioned Juice University. Did I hear right?
Yes. Coca-Cola has Juice University.
Tell us about that.
That was quite an experience. It was in Sugar Land, Texas. So we went to Florida, where there's a lot of citrus growing there. So we, you learn to understand the different varieties of citrus that are there, the different regions where the citrus grows. And then obviously the standards of growing are very important. You then learn to understand how the products are then harvested and then going to the factory, how are the products processed? And we must also remember there's a key element in agribusiness, which is seasonality. That's why value addition is so important. The blueberries are in season, Batje, they're in season. So they will be harvested. And so if you need them for juice, you need to process them during harvesting season. You buy and you process. So it's a capital intensive business, which makes it harder for small players like me. But at the end of the day, it's seasonal. So you have to understand which market is in season when, because some markets will go into season for citrus at a different time from others. And so if you're a big company like Coca-Cola, you have to know when to buy which varieties from which markets and process. And then from there, it's how do you blend? How do you maintain same quality? Because these products are seasonal, depending on the amount of rainfall that may have, taken place, or whether there's irrigation or not. There's soil types that are different, climates are different, so it can have an impact on the juice. So you have to blend the juice to make sure that you still get a consistent taste for your product. And that's part of value addition work. How do you ensure that a tomato grown in Toko and a tomato grown in Murewa will still give you the same result, maybe the same variety, but how do you ensure that? So that was part of the learnings that we had. So it was fun learning, It was really enjoyable. The different ways of preserving the juices when they've now been harvested, because you can preserve them aseptically where there's no preservative. You can freeze them where there's no preservative, or you can add preservative, and then they can be stored, and their shelf life is increased by anything from 12 months to 24, 48 months, depending on the preservation process. And that means it's accessible in and out of season. When you need to manufacture, whether orange season is over, you can still continue to supply the consumers with the product that they used to. So Juice University was amazing. It was a great experience.
What's the one thing you would say you learned at Juice University that you were able to apply locally and, up till to now is something that you use at Fillers?
I think it's the consistency in terms of the brand promise. So that obviously means working with the technical teams. There were times where we'd have juice shortages and we'd be buying juice from different suppliers. And what we'd find is they would have slightly different consistencies, even though they're supposed to be exactly the same. But there were always some inconsistencies. So we knew how to blend. We had a team, an R&D team that was blending. So when I look at my business now in terms of the type of R&D I want to set up, I'm still working towards it. I haven't arrived yet. There's a talented young lady that's been doing our R&D. It's that ability to adapt and still maintain your brand promise. So you've adapted within the four walls of your production facility, but you've delivered the taste profile that the customer is used to. They don't need to know that you bought this juice or this tomatoes or this paste from that supplier, not that one, and so forth, because specifications will change. Sometimes the sugar levels will be different within fruits from a particular place. So that ability to blend and maintain consistency is very possible and very easy. So that's one thing that I have taken away and will ensure that in my business it's applied consistently.
This episode is brought to you by HUMHR, the boutique career and leadership consultancy helping professionals get clear, get confident, and get hired. From CV writing and Clifton Strengths coaching to interview prep and leadership development, HUMHR is here to help you take the next step in your career. Visit humhr.org, HUMHR.org to learn more.
Have you, I saw in your bio, in the StandOwt blurb that you actually teach, right? Or do you train? Is that informed from having learned from other people, having had all this exposure that you've had, traveling 15 countries, going to Juice University, seeing of how oranges in Florida are grown, how their juices are made in Florida? Has that informed how you then decided you need to impart some of that knowledge locally?
Definitely. StandOwt, first and foremost, is for me to continue utilizing my creativity. Branding, communications, business development. It's all about being creative problem solving. I like to call it connecting the dots, So that's the reason why I did set up that consultancy. So I am definitely using my skills to help my customers solve their business problems with regards to products, value chains, in market strategies, research, consumer insights. So that is a very critical aspect of it. And I do have the skills. I had the privilege of learning from big global giants. I had the privilege of traveling to markets that are more advanced. And dare I say, right now, if we look at some of the younger people that are coming into businesses, even if they're joining, established businesses, they're still a bit raw, maybe because of changing dynamics, not as hungry for learning as we were. We were soaking it in. We're like sponges.
Yes.
Wanted to prove everybody that I can do it. So there's I feel like there's a little bit of change in the way that young people operate now. And so being able to impart those skills that we had from back in the day is actually useful, I feel, because it's just basic foundational principles that sometimes can be ignored. But there are certain principles that shouldn't be ignored in any business development or branding work. Otherwise, they can affect your level of success. So I do enjoy sharing that. I do speak as well at conferences like with the Marketers Association. They'll typically either give me a subject to share, knowledge on, or they'll ask me to pick a topic and say, okay, what topic do you want to share on? And so I'll find something that's relevant for businesses today that I feel I'm competent in and share. And then we also have Zimtrade. I'm a certified Zimtrade export consultant. So I also help them, with some of the projects that they're running with for various entrepreneurs. And it's also good for me. I'm learning. I have to keep my mind sharp, so I'm also learning. And when I go into these forums, I benefit as well. Yeah.
Yes. Always learning. It's always, you never stop learning.
Yeah.
So I stand out and food fillers. How are you managing to to wear both hats, right? You are also board. You also sit on board of directors. I think you actually are chairman of a board, right? That's
vice chairman.
Vice chair. Okay, let's be clear. Vice chair of the board. That's a lot of hats, plus all the other hats that that you mentioned. That as African women, there are a lot of hats that are in the home, in the social, in our social lives. There are a lot of hats that as African women we wear, and lots of expectations. Now, how do you navigate those different hats, and how do you keep sane, basically? That's because you're building two brands at the same time as having to live life.
Yeah.
So tell me, in terms of wellness, what do you have? What is your everyday strategy for wellness, and also for managing to grow the different brands and keep them separate while growing them in their own right?
Yeah, so when you're starting out, business happens and grows in peaks and troughs. So you have relatively quiet periods where you wish, oh my gosh, why isn't there consultancy work? Or cash flows are tight, so you're not really manufacturing at the levels that you wished you were. So because I'm still in startup mode, I'm on the runway. Yes, to some extent, we've taken off, but I still consider it being on the runway to some extent. It's manageable with all those hats. But at the same time, I am operating in an environment that is generally very complicated. We have utility challenges, whether it's water. I mean, if I tell you my story for today, if I can paint my picture of today, right, to answer your question by painting this picture.
Yes.
We haven't had power for about 3 days. I think this is day 4 now. We'd spent last week with no power. It was restored on Saturday. Is it Friday? Friday, yes. And then Monday it was gone again because apparently our substation was vandalized. And so we haven't had power. So typical of most Zimbabweans, we have generators, we'll have solar backup, but it affects how you work. So it's been a bit overcast, rainy season still. It's been a bit over, so the solar batteries haven't been charging as much. So today I woke up to darkness. I flick a switch, the solar is out, and I've got this great plan for preparing tuck for my kids, so I needed to use the stove, the air fryer, but I couldn't because now the solar's out of batteries, so I had to use the gas stove. So it changes. You have to learn to pivot, and I have one child who wasn't feeling well yesterday. This morning another one wasn't. And then at some point, in all this power thing, it means the gadgets that we typically have in our homes that are supposed to help us as women to make our lives easier, your air fryers, if you can't run that, there's no power. It's annoying. It adds to the stress levels that you already have. And then my helper wasn't feeling well as well. So that added to the things that I needed to. And so can't use the washing machine, can't use the dryers, and kids got to go to school. They need stuff. I mean, if I tell you I took a wet tracksuit bottom and put it in the air fryer when there was still a little bit of solar power to try and dry it up because I didn't have a dryer and it was required. And then it touched the top of the grill and got burnt. So that's... And just as well, we had another one tucked away somewhere, from that a sibling used to wear that was condition. And so I just thank God for that, because if it hadn't been for that, it would have been a disaster, because this young boy needed his tracksuit for school. So you see Now, before I can even talk about the inconvenience to my business, not having I'm just talking about just in the home context, a woman trying to run a home effectively. And when water runs out, you have to buy water, or if your borehole stops pumping because you haven't had a good rainy season, you have to buy water. And so it can run out. You have to work on your water deliveries. So there was a therapist that I had who said in our economic environment, in other countries, people are operating at this level of stress. And in Zim, we're here. And we think it's normal. To us, this is normal.
Yes.
So when that happens, when some of these challenges come, they take you here, right? So I think to some level, I've developed a resilience that I think everybody else has. But I think my faith keeps me sane to a large extent, but also my support system. My husband is very supportive in the home and in the business. He's very, very supportive. He will cover my gaps. He will do what needs to be done. And just as well, also I'm married to a person who's technical. So if he needs to do some gymnastics with the solar batteries to make things work for me and for my work, he will do it. He'll step in. He's really good with the kids. So for women, we really need a strong support system. And for those who are married or desiring to be married, your spouse is a critical make or break. You have to marry someone who appreciates your ambitions, who appreciates your skills, your abilities, and wants to see you grow and flourish. Not someone wants to take that away from you when you yourself feel you still have something to give and you want to build and you want to create. So marry someone who won't find you to be competition, but who will support you and walk alongside you. So creating those support systems, even if it means a helper, getting two helpers, we're privileged. In Africa to have affordable help, sometimes it also means if your kid has to take an in-drive, which is the equivalent of Uber from school to their extracurricular, that's what needs to happen because you're not available, And if we have to work at night at the factory and run night shift, our kids now understand that we'll might get home at 5 o'clock in the morning and then run along to school. And those that can drive, sometimes you're like, okay, today you drive yourselves to school because we've just come in. So I think it's a tenacity that is based on wanting to succeed. Despite all these challenges, we develop systems and ways of working around them so that they don't break us, but instead they make us stronger. They say what doesn't kill you can only make you stronger. I think it's important to also take time out to relax with other people, minded people. Have that cup of coffee, and eat that donut, even though at our age it may not be so good for you. But eat that donut when you need to eat that donut, There's absolutely nothing wrong with pampering yourselves. Go get your nails done. Get that pedicure. You deserve it. You've been on your feet for a long time. Granted, not every woman can afford that. But whatever it is that she can afford, within her level of lifestyle that can give her that peace of not visiting your parents or your sister's friends, whatever it is, I think it's important to know what it is and do it. Because nobody will do it. Nobody will understand how tired or, how overwhelmed you are. Only you would know, and you take it upon yourself to look out for yourself. If kids have to have a sandwich for supper, it's okay. There are days where you have to allow that to happen. If they need to eat takeout, it's okay, because you can't be the perfect mom that gets it 100%. You have to look out for yourself. You only have one life. You only have one body as well. So it's also eat well, even when you're working hard to try and make the better choices. Yes, I did speak of sandwiches, but it's important to understand your body, what your body responds well to and what it doesn't. So that's another very important element of it as well. And sometimes to just take time out to do something, my husband calls it brain dead activities, that don't require too much from you. It might be watching TV, as simple as that, or reading a book. Whatever brain activity you need to have every now and again, do it. Just do it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that honest reflection and just that honest advice. I think sometimes we want to pamper it, want to sugarcoat it, right? But there are some real hard challenges that come with being a African woman trying to build something, and it's so important. The things that really stood out for me in your conversation were that resilience and the tenacity you mentioned, and the best is the support system, and how and loving yourself, right? The support system includes yourself. You have to be your very first supporter, very first advocate, right? Like you said, you're the only one that will know that you're overwhelmed. So that stood out at me. And I liked what you mentioned in the beginning, that you had a therapist. Sometimes you need that crutch.
Stay sane, because you have to stay. You have, especially when there's other people that are depending on you.
Yes.
When you have a family, it's you get that higher level of responsibility that comes along with family, because you have other people depending on you, and not just your family. If you have employees, they're depending on you. So your sanity is important, because their families are dependent on you. So you need to do whatever it takes to stay sane without doing anything illegal, of course. Nothing illegal, nothing that's not good for your body or for your health.
I like that brain dead activities. I think that's one thing that I have found works really well with the overwhelm, preventing the burnout. Reading a book, it's amazing. You're learning, but you're not, your brain is not like moving at the speed at which our brains are having to move these days, because everything is moving so fast. You're just immersed in this one thing that is just soaking it in, rather than having to think, what am I going to do now and all that. Yeah. So thank you very much for sharing that. I would like to talk a little bit more about Fillers Food and why it mattered. I wanted to talk about the problem-solving aspect of it, right? Because there's a problem you were trying to solve with StandOwt and also with Fillers Food. And one of the things was reducing post-harvest losses. That's what Fillers Food is focused on. Why did this matter to you, and what does it feel like to now build something that you once led at corporate level?
Having been immersed in value addition, it has such immense potential that is untapped. So if I look at Africa, we get our sustenance from the land. We still have a lot of land. We have opportunities to eat fresh food. We grow stuff in our gardens. We grow stuff commercially, right? But what happens when there's a glut in the market? Prices dip, right? So there's a farmer, one who has put in whatever they had into growing those tomatoes, growing those bananas, sweet potatoes, whatever it may be. And if there's a glut in the market, and maybe their typical customers can't take the quantities that they could have, or the prices have dipped because there's so much competition and the prices are lower, and people become desperate. And what happens? Product is seasonal. It rots. It goes bad, and it's only good for what? For throwing away. So whether it's avocado, it's bananas, you name it, there's only so many bananas that you can eat in a day. And if you're a farmer and you were doing it for the market and they start to go bad, what do? You can only make so much banana bread before they go bad. So there has to be a way in which we can preserve. So whether it's drying, if you think about it, Africans had been drying even meat because there were people with no refrigeration, right? So they would cut up the meat, put lots of salt and dry it up. And so we've been doing it. We have been doing it, only not at commercial scale. So value is about doing it at commercial scale so you can benefit more people. So if it's bananas, whether we are drying them so that we can then put them in cereal, or we're going to make banana chips and pack them, that's what value addition is about, so that farmers don't lose product or lose out simply because there's a glut, or simply because, and also for the market to benefit as well, because if the blueberry season is over, I can't get fresh blueberries. But if they've been either frozen or dried or, packed in cans, I can still access when they're out of season. So to me, it's like a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer for us to focus on doing it affordably so that the consumers benefit by having this stuff that they typically have fresh all season round. And the biggest opportunity that I see for Africans as well is our traditional products. Not all of us can afford to grow blueberries and pay for the expensive genetics, because there's people who own particular genetics that can be exported into various countries. So you have to pay them royalties for their genetics. So a normal farmer, small startup, or smallholder farmer can't afford to do that. So why do we look down upon our own products? Whether mbora, which is your pumpkin leaves, your butternut, your sweet potato. There's even African fruits. I mean, if you think of it, tastes like dates a little, right? But we're not value adding any of those. I love African fruits. I love them, but nobody is growing them or propagating them. There are very few people. My husband does propagate. He's got a tree planting project because he believes that food solutions for Africans are that simple. Plant a fruit tree and nobody needs to go hungry. That's what he believes. So if we think about it, we tend to then plant mangoes, pawpaws, but our traditional African fruits, we are not growing, probably because they're long-term. It takes a long time. They're proper hardwood trees, most of them. But there's opportunity even for those. And even with growing, growing our own healthy millet, value addition of that, there's huge opportunities. They're much healthier. A lot of them are superfoods. That's the honest truth. We're not looking at what else can I do. Sweet potato flour is healthier than wheat flour. But if nobody is processing, and everybody in my country is doing maize and doing wheat, how farmers benefit? So I see that immense potential. This dream is bigger than me. It takes a lot more to see that same potential.
I see that potential, and I will be a bit of a controversial question here in terms of, we started off talking about local market and export readiness and how it's good to export, right? But the balance, you brought it in nicely. I was thinking about it, and you brought it in nicely with that local product. Now, the balance between using our land, you talked about land and resources, using that land to grow blueberries and not a local food. How does that affect, the sustainability, right? And then there's making sure there's enough food for the local population. Now, if we all start growing blueberries or we all start growing chili for export, will we have millet? Will we have our knee? Will we have those the rapokos? Will we have those local foods for local consumption? So that sustainability and that balance. Can you talk into that, speak into that?
Yeah, so that balance depends on us and our level of pride and also understanding. And why I say pride and understanding is because eating an African fruit doesn't make me lesser than someone who's eating blueberries. And I think Africans to have that sense of pride. And also when I say understanding, we do very limited R&D, research and development. African economies, very limited. A lot of the fruits that we have, the traditional ones, are superfoods. A lot of the grains that we have are gluten-free and very healthy. But because we do very limited research, we don't educate people so that they actually understand that, this might be better for you than what you think. You're getting it at a lower cost than this alternative that has been sold to you. We've had a little bit of, neocolonialism that says foreign is better. but foreign is not necessarily better. Our climate might be perfect and give us the best blueberries. But you know what? If baobab powder has 5 times, the levels of vitamin C than citrus does, why are we not selling baobab powder, chewable tablets? That's value addition, right? Buy it as powder. Yes, it is value addition to some extent, but I'm just saying, why don't we take it the next level? Why am I buying vitamin C tablets that came from Big Pharma when baobab powder can give me that? Packed in there. Moringa can give me. We're not investing in research. African governments invest in research and education. So I think that's such a critical element of it.
I like that, and I love that vision, Una, because once you have the research, right, you can now sell the product. You can export instead of now bringing in blueberries to grow to export. You can actually grow the local foods and export that too. So not only are you managing to make enough for local consumption, you also have enough to export, and people want it because guess what? Maybe that baobab is actually more of a superfood than the blueberry, more of an antioxidant than the blueberry, but we will never know because there's no research. But the research is there for blueberries, that blueberries are antioxidants. Think about our mulberries. Our mulberries are also something that is up there in terms of antioxidants, isn't it? But they don't fall the education, like you're saying, and the branding. Back to branding.
Yeah. And how many people are planting them right now? If people are told, no, the money is in this, those that can afford it will move towards that. But it doesn't necessarily mean, there is no sustenance, coming from a particular product. Right now, do you know the genetics for okra? I think they don't even sit probably with Africans. I think somebody has registered okra. That's the other thing, ownership rights. Right now, Africans, happily getting on with life, and people are taking magaka, the African prickly cucumber, and somebody's registered the genetics. So,
really?
Yes, I can't even remember which country, whether it's an American or something, who's registered the genetics. So you see how the world is changing, and the world is, people are smart out there. They see potential, and then they'll just quietly go and register a patent. We are still growing it in our gardens. We're eating it. We've been eating it from time immemorial. Our ancestors, that we're growing it. So that's why I say, as Africans, we need to have some level of pride in our own things. And like I said, a lot of it is a little bit of the dregs of neocolonialism, where, there was a bit of a challenge with accepting that you can have a herbalist who understands what a particular tree can treat in terms of diseases, because people just use roots, they use leaves, they use bark. You would be told that, okay, for a toothache, use this one. Go to this tree, soak it. So the problem was dosages, because of no research. Dosages. The herbalists would just kind of say, okay, take a pinch or take a root and soak it in water for this long and then drink. So the dosages, but you know what? Our ancestors survived. They survived even without clear dosages. And then that was kind of mixed with the spiritual element now, where there were some people who were administering medication from a spiritual perspective. So we then stopped learning from just a herbal perspective. So we have a lot of trees right now that are being grown, and a lot of herbs which we consider weeds that are being exported, believe it or not, from Africa, and then they come back in value-added format to treat diseases, and Africans are having to pay for them now in value-added format. And yet there's a granny or a great-granny who knew what each particular tree could do, and we've lost out on that intellectual property. But those that are investing in research, guess what? They're doing the research on our behalf, and then all they do is they quietly come and buy, from smallholders who are growing this particular weed, and when I say weed, it's like a plant that most of us will probably look at it and think it's good for nothing, but it's actually healing properties. And then it comes back value added, and we're paying a lot of money for it. So we really need to have pride in who we are, where we from, there's a lot of good things that historically are in our lineage. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to actually talk about Africa Rising, and I think a lot of the thoughts that I wanted to discuss with you, we've actually spoken about, but I want to just get you to talk to this narrative about Africa Rising. You've operated locally and globally. What does that mean to you? What does the term Africa Rising mean to you? Is it hype? Is it real? Where we've talked already about where we're getting it right, and where we're still fragile. But is this narrative hype or real? And what does it mean to you?
It's real. From where I sit, it's definitely real. And I look at it from, let's just take a look at a population perspective. We have a young population. We are still having children. Because we have to keep our economies going. There was a time when Africa was looked down upon. Oh, they have too many children that they can't look after and that kind of thing. But look at it now. We have economies that have aging populations and they're struggling. And guess who they're trying to attract from an immigration perspective? African. There's some countries in the EU right now that are actively creating programs because they need employees. Whether we like it or not, in the age of technology, you still need the human brain.
Yes.
So they need the human brain, and for certain jobs, you still need human hands, you need human feet. So we are privileged to still have a young population. And we also privileged to now be in a global village with that young population. So in other words, even without traveling, minds can be opened.
Yes.
To the potential that is out there thanks to technology. So yes, Africa is rising because of that young population. And then the second aspect is mineral wealth. We still have it. We still have that potential to generate wealth and plow back into our people, into our economies with that mineral wealth. We still have a lot. We may not have oil, but we have other things. And some are yet even to be discovered. That's the honest truth. So we do have that opportunity. And then last but not least, for me, it goes back to land. Land is current. I keep saying that to people. Batje, land is current. We have people competing to live in urban areas right now. Someone would rather live in a tiny room and be renting and paying $50 than living on 1 hectare in a rural area. If I was given the choice, in this day and age with solar energy and boreholes, I would happily relocate to live on 10 hectares somewhere in the rural areas. But the only challenge, obviously, is livelihoods and infrastructure. So in other words, the road network or the transport network doesn't allow to live out of town because I'll to come and, to see my customers, I'll struggle to work.
Yes,
and that's the only challenge.
Yes.
But our land is currency. So if we just supported that with infrastructure development, we could do so much. And also, unlike mineral wealth, land, which we still have in abundance compared to other economies as Africans, will continue to feed you. It will feed you from season to season. With minerals, we mine today, it's gone. Right? But with land, it will continue to feed you. As long as you apply sustainable practices, it will endure over time. So we do have those benefits. And climate as well. We've got great climate. Some people will be freezing there. And, here we are, it's winter, but it's like 22 degrees Celsius, in winter. It was it's cold.
Yes.
We've got great climate. We've got great climate. And also we have people who are willing to work. Africans are willing to work with their hands, with their brains. They're willing to work. The work ethic is still there. Whereas in more developed economies, people are used to an easier life. So sometimes, work ethic can be a challenge for some. I'm just generalizing here. It's not that it's all over. We're willing to work because we do want to develop. We're still undeveloped in so many ways. So we're still willing to put in the work. So yes, Africa is rising. We have so much potential.
If you were given the floor, right, and you could wave a magic wand, so to speak, what is the one thing that you would change or that you would implement to ensure that the potential becomes reality, right? That it just doesn't remain a potential, that it rises, not is rising, but has risen kind of thing.
The magic wand thing for me is water. With water and land, so much can be done. And water is life. People need it for drinking. Why should a woman have to wake up and walk 20 kilometers to come back with just 20 liters? So I'll make sure that everybody has access to water, because you know what it means is that even the poorest of the poor can water a garden. And if they can water it, they can eat. And if they can water a garden, they can sell excess. So water, for me, is it. That's the magic wand for Africa. If everybody had access to water as and when they needed it, we'd be okay.
Yeah.
We would be.
I like that. Always about resources. We've been talking for over an hour. I think this is also a little bit of catch up on our part. But I don't want to let you go without talking a little bit about leadership, governance, and legacy. What female leadership looks like in Zimbabwe today. So you've served on boards and you understand governance deeply. How important would you say governance is for SMEs?
It is absolutely crucial. And the reason why I say that is because governance requires you to be accountable. So as SMEs, we tend to have one purse, family issues and business. And typically SMEs are family business. There are some where there may be partnerships, but it's typically partnerships amongst friends, which is still more or less like what? Like families. So governance becomes important because whether we like it or not, we have seen people crying because someone that they trusted has either run off with money or cheated them in that business. So setting up structures becomes critical for African SMEs, especially Zimbabwean ones, where things can get tough and someone can be tempted. So setting up structures is critical because it holds people accountable. It also gives you a fallback position should things go wrong. And setting up structures that work also protects you legally, depending on whatever takes place. So, and also having people to bounce off ideas on. You know what someone said? Someone said even if you're an SME, have a board. That board will hold you accountable. I mean, if a philanthropic organization can have a board that is just advising, it may even be a non-paid board, right? Depending on the size of that philanthropic organization. You ask for people to volunteer to support you. Friends, relatives, please, can you be my board? And so they become, excuse the pun, a sounding board for your business. And they helping you to see things that you may not have seen. And that all comes from setting up proper governance structures. They don't need to be expensive. They don't need to cost anything. And I think in Zimbabwe right now, the government is doing a great job. They're implementing a lot of policy changes under the ease of doing business. They've reduced, just this week, they've reduced a lot of bylaws. Like an example is a food handler's certificate for a factory employee was around $45 per annum. Now it's $5. So they're doing stuff. They're trying to change licenses. They're trying to change even for SMEs when they're registering with the Procurement Authority of Zimbabwe. They pay far less now than they used to pay in the past. So there's all these changes that the government is trying to put in place, which will then assist SMEs to be compliant with regulations for their own protection. Not just for the authorities, but for their own protection. So it is something that's very important, and I think people are starting to see, and hopefully more businesses will implement. I think it's typically cost that has prohibited a lot of smaller players from implementing, and the fear of the unknown as well. Simplifying processes so that businesses can be structured legally and so forth. So we are seeing a change. We are seeing service providers shifting in line with the fact that there's a lot more smaller players than there are bigger companies in our economy. So how do I make sure that I can offer legal services to someone who may not necessarily be able to afford at certain levels? How do I ensure that I can offer a business insurance package or a health insurance package to a business that typically would not be looking for it? So I'm seeing that shift in the market where we are really getting businesses to formalize, because governance requires a little bit of formalization of systems and process. And you don't need to do it just because you're being policed, but you do it to protect your business. And I think people are starting to see, because families can be dramatic. And so people are starting to, especially African families, right? How can be. So people are starting to see the need to legalize, to have paperwork, So governance is really critical. And I think things are picking up, even with regards things like protection of patents, registering, your patents and things like that. That awareness is picking up as well.
Una, what is the biggest mistake entrepreneurs make in a tough market like Zimbabwe?
They're just things that we don't anticipate. That's the honest truth. We never sit down and do a full risk analysis. We get into business and I think we assume a lot of things. So we need to do proper risk analysis. Doesn't matter what kind of a business you are in, and I'll give you an example. So we have the lovely lady that we buy Sadza from. We buy meals from, when we go to the factory. We buy Sadza for $1, Batje. And it tastes so good. Sometimes it might be rice with a tiny little piece of chicken and a coleslaw. But trust me, it's rice that I can eat over 2 or 3 days. The portion is so generous. But she's... And I wonder, as a business person, I think about it, how is she making a profit on $1 or $1.50 or $2 for Sadza? That has a piece of meat, that has veggies and all that, right? So here we are, we are supporting this lady, we're supporting her to grow. And so if you look at someone with that level of business, when she had a challenge and she won't be insured, obviously, with those prices, there's no way you can be insured, but you want to push volume so you can pay rent. She works from a container that was fabricated. She uses gas for cooking. And guess what? Somebody, a young relative of hers from the rural areas, unplugged a fridge, I think, and plugged something else. Freezer.
Oh no.
She lost
a
significant amount of meat stock. She called me. She was like, I need your help. I need to restock. Please just give me whatever you can. And obviously, because, we know her, she knows us, we gave her something. And I'd like to hope and think that a lot of other people also supported her. So those are some of the risks that we don't anticipate. Who would have anticipated that someone would unplug the fridge, the freezer, and forget to plug it? So they had traveled, and by the time they came back, they had to throw away all the meat. And she had stocked up because she's got a lot of meat. And because her food is low cost, her margins are really thin. So who would have anticipated that? So we need to teach our business people risk management. Because if she doesn't have backup power, what if she doesn't have Zesa for a week like we didn't have last week? That's the biggest mistake we make. We're not skilled at risk analysis. And even then, look, we won't cover all the bases, but we can at least do some basics to say, look, if I don't have Zesa for 2 days, what do I do with my frozen meat? So that those are the biggest, that's where I would say we need to improve. If we can improve on that, we'll have less shocks, coming into our business. Yes, shocks will come. They definitely will. I mean, we're doing night shift tomorrow. We do night shift most of the time because whenever we thought we were being clever and we decided, oh no, there's been power consistently this week during the day, we're going to run day production. So we were I think Zessa was just like, oh, who do you think you are? That day, and waited and had to send people home, So you see now, and it's a cost that I'm still going to incur because I will pay people for coming over, even if they didn't work, because because the water tank was leaking. So there's all these little risks that we can anticipate, and we need to figure out a risk management strategy at whatever level of business we are running in Africa. So we need to learn risk management. It will really go a long way as small players so that we don't suffer significant losses.
Yeah, I like that. I think it goes back to having governance systems in place. I think when you're a small business and you're founding something, you think, I'm going to do things as I go. I'm going to just play it by ear. But the risks, if you don't do that risk management and you don't do a strategy, then you find yourselves in cases where you're like, you're struggling with having lost all your meat, for instance, right? Because there was no risk management in that. If I stock up and I leave, what could possibly happen?
Sometimes you have to work on a just-in-time system, right? And be like, okay, I'll only buy so much stock so that I reduce my risk, I lower my risk. So we need to teach people a lot more of that at whatever level they're operating in. If the bananas go bad and I'm a vendor, and because I bought a lot, what happens then? So it's trying to see how we can reduce the risk of doing business in such volatile economies.
Thank you, Una. We have done way more than an hour, and I asked for an hour of your valuable time. So I
enjoying this. This is what I enjoy, so I'm happy. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on HUMHR Career Insights and sharing your valuable expertise. And but before we go, I do these fun questions just to wind down the conversation. And I am wondering if you had an opportunity to put up a billboard in Zimbabwe on the busiest street in Harare, what would that billboard say?
Wow. It probably would just say connect the dots and have a full stop dot at the end.
Because there goes the brand person.
That's what business is about. Business is about connecting the dots. Yeah, you have to be able to look at your market, your customers, your skills, your abilities, your finances, and connect them in such a way that it makes sense for you and what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's what problem solving is about. It's about connecting the dots. So that's what it is.
Yeah. And that's what entrepreneurship is about.
Marketing, less is more. So connect the dots with a dot right at the end.
Fire round questions, rapid fire questions. The first thing that comes to your mind, brand or product?
Brand.
Strategy or speed?
Speed.
Export or local dominance?
We spoke about that one. Local dominance.
One word that defines leadership?
Service.
One book every entrepreneur should read?
The Bible. It's got all the lessons you will need about life and business. All the lessons you'll need. It's packed with lessons.
You are my second guest who has said this. So if you have not yet listened to my conversation with Wani, Joanna, I will share it with you. If you have not yet listened to it, she also said the same thing to that question, the Bible.
Great minds think alike. Please do share it. I must listen to it today.
Una, thank you very much for being willing to come on HUMHR Career Insights and share your insights. And I am hoping that one day you will come back again to talk a little bit more about Fillers and I Stand Out, where Fillers is now a bigger organization. Yes, I will bring you back and we can have a conversation about what has changed and share some more insights then. Thank you. And to our listeners, and if you are watching on YouTube, stay inspired. Don't forget to subscribe and follow and share.